In the heart of Lagos, where ambition clashed with traffic jams and glass towers reached for the clouds, Linda lived a life many only dreamed of. At 35, she was the director of operations at Zenix Logistics, a top-tier African supply chain powerhouse. Her calendar was booked for the next 6 months. Her car was bulletproof, her home a penthouse suite in Ikoyi. She dined with CEOs, made decisions that moved millions, and had a reputation for being brilliant, unbending, and fiercely independent. But while the world saw a high-flying executive, Linda often felt the gnawing emptiness of a life lived at the top with no one to share it. She had buried her father young, watched her mother work herself into an early grave, and vowed to never be poor again. But success was lonely. For all the power Linda wielded in boardrooms, the silence in her luxury apartment was deafening. The clinking of her wine glass echoed too loudly at night. She had wealth, yes. Designer bags lined her wardrobe, her fridge was never empty, and her phone buzzed endlessly with emails, not affection. She had conquered corporate Africa, but in the quiet moments, when the makeup came off and the heels were kicked aside, she longed for something simpler and deeper. A partner, not just someone to sit beside her at galas, but a man who truly saw her, someone to laugh with, fight with, plan with, someone who would hold her at night and build a real future, with her. She dreamed of a home filled with giggles and little feet running down polished floors, of weekend meals shared on worn sofas, of love that didn't care for LinkedIn titles or tax brackets. She never said this out loud, not even to her friends. In their circles, such longing was seen as weakness. But beneath the sharp blazers and confident strides, Linda was a woman who wanted more than success. She wanted belonging. She wanted a family. And somewhere deep down, she wondered if she had climbed so high that no one could reach her heart anymore. Men admired her, but most were either intimidated or simply wanted to ride her coattails. Then came Emeka. Emeka was her company-assigned driver, a quiet, observant man in his early 30s, with deep brown eyes and a stillness that intrigued Linda more than she cared to admit. He was never late, never disrespectful, and always found the safest shortcuts in traffic like magic. He called her Madam, opened her doors, and occasionally left small plantain snacks on the back seat, where she sat when she skipped breakfast. At first he was invisible to the world around her, but Linda noticed the way he treated people, his dignity, his listening ear, and the rare, thoughtful advice he gave without pride. She learned bits about him over time. He sent money to his younger siblings in the East, read business magazines while waiting in the car, and once she caught him sketching a delivery network map in an old exercise book. "You draw logistics routes?" she asked one day, amused. He smiled shyly. "Just an idea, madam. I like to imagine how things can move better." That evening, something shifted. It was just another ride home. Or at least, that's how it began. The usual Lagos traffic was thick and unforgiving, horns blaring like angry birds, impatient Danfo drivers zigzagging through narrow lanes. Linda sat in the back seat of her company-issued SUV, reading a strategy proposal on her tablet, her face set in the usual mask of calm determination. But her eyes kept drifting, not to the road, but to Emeka, her driver. He was humming softly under his breath, a tune she couldn't place, something folk-like, almost mournful, yet oddly soothing. The rain had just started, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windshield like distant war drums. He leaned forward slightly, adjusting the wipers, calm and focused. That's when she noticed his notebook. It sat in the glove compartment, partially visible, its corner sticking out under a packet of mints. Curious, she reached for it. "May I?" she asked. Emeka glanced at her through the rearview mirror, surprised. "Yes, madam." Inside were pages of delivery route sketches, ideas for pricing models, names of potential vendors. Notes scribbled with intensity and clarity. Some pages had motivational quotes, others had calculations, and on one, in bold block letters, he had written, "Someday, I'll build something that works." Linda felt her chest tighten. Here was a man who hadn't just accepted life's limits, he was quietly sketching his way out of them. He had dreams, structure, thought, vision, and he wasn't loud about it. He didn't post about grind culture or talk endlessly about hustle. He just worked, waited, and believed. Something in Linda shifted. For the first time, she saw Emeka not as her driver, not as an employee in a uniform, but as a man with fire, with potential, with a kind of depth she didn't expect. And he looked at her, not with intimidation or adoration, but with understanding, as though he saw past the expensive jewelry and corporate title to the woman who sometimes cried in the shower after tough days, the woman who longed for something more than strategy meetings and shareholder returns. It wasn't romantic yet, but it was real, a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. From that evening on, their conversations changed. They were no longer limited to traffic updates or schedules. Something had cracked open between them, quiet but undeniable. Linda began to ask questions, not out of politeness, but genuine curiosity. And Emeka, though still reserved, began to answer with the kind of thoughtfulness that lingered. On Monday mornings, she asked how his weekend had gone. He spoke of going to the mechanic in Mushi, sending money home to help his sister pay her university fees, or fixing the leaking ceiling in his one-room apartment. But somehow, even his struggles were laced with a kind of resilience that impressed her. Other days they talked about life in Lagos, the absurd cost of bread, the frustration of power outages, the jokes from social media. She found herself laughing more often with him than she did at her executive lunches. But what truly caught her off guard were his insights. One afternoon, stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, Linda sighed and muttered, "This whole system is broken. No matter how efficient we try to be at work, the rest of the country just bleeds time." Emeka responded without turning his head, "It's not the system that's broken, madam. It's the people pretending they're fixing it who don't really want it to work." She blinked, then smiled. He wasn't just a listener, he was a thinker. Over time, their routine became sacred. She'd enter the car, remove her heels, and let her shoulders relax. With Emeka, she didn't need to be Linda, director of operations. She could just be Linda, the woman who sometimes didn't sleep, who loved pepper soup more than caviar, who carried the loneliness of success like a stone in her bag. And Emeka? He never treated her like a trophy. He respected her mind, not her title. He never tried to fix her, he just held space for her to breathe. Some evenings they sat in silence, watching Lagos lights flicker past, and somehow that silence spoke louder than words. She began to wait for those drives. They became the calm in her chaos. Long before the meetings, the deadlines, the calls that began at 7:01 a.m. sharp, there were the rides with Emeka, a half-hour of stillness in a life that never seemed to pause. It was the only time of day she didn't have to be strategic, composed, or brilliant. In that car, with the hum of the engine and the muted sounds of the world outside, she found something that had long eluded her: peace. She started leaving her phone in her bag more often during the rides, started turning her head to the side to watch the sunrise reflect off Emeka's jawline as he focused on the road. There was something grounding about him. His steady presence softened her. It was in the way he drove, not rushed, not reckless, just consistent, as though he understood that even in movement, stillness could exist. The way he greeted her each morning, "Good morning, madam," with that respectful but warm tone, became the first genuine human kindness she received in a day full of corporate demands. She began to associate his voice with comfort, and the car became more than a vehicle. It became a cocoon, a private world that existed between one chaos and the next. If she had a rough board meeting, he could sense it without being told. He wouldn't ask questions, just turn on the quiet music station she liked, and drive in silence. But it was a good kind of silence, the kind that asked nothing of her, and gave everything in return. When she was exhausted, she'd lean her head back, close her eyes, and let his steady driving rock her into rest. Once she fell asleep in the back seat for nearly 40 minutes after a disastrous product launch. When she woke up, the car hadn't moved. Emeka had pulled into a shaded side street and let her sleep. "I figured you needed the break more than the destination," he'd said with a small smile. She stared at him for a moment longer than necessary. It was kindness without performance, care without possession. And in a world that constantly took from her, this man, this quiet, thoughtful man, gave. Every ride became more than transportation. It became ritual, a soft opening and gentle closing to her day. The only part of her routine that didn't demand that she perform. And slowly, without ever saying it aloud, Linda began to crave that feeling, that space, that version of herself she only ever found when she was with him. It was subtle, no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, but every laugh, every shared thought, every glance in the rearview mirror built something unspoken between them, something fragile, something tender, something real. And Linda, she began to listen, not just with her ears, but with her heart. They started talking more. During long drives to meetings, Linda would rant about boardroom politics and office drama. Amika listened with a kind of quiet wisdom. Once, after a disastrous investor pitch, she slumped into the back seat and sighed. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this anymore." Emeka looked at her through the rearview mirror and said, "A lion doesn't stop being a lion just because it's tired." That sentence stayed with her. Then came the night. Everything changed. Her car broke down after a late dinner meeting. The rain had come suddenly, tropical and wild, hammering down on Lagos like the sky had been holding its breath all day. She'd been stranded outside a hotel after a late networking dinner. The parking valet had disappeared, and the car had refused to start. Her phone was dying. The security guards were busy arguing over shift duties. She stood there, furious, heels in one hand, clutch purse in the other, mascara smudged ever so slightly under her eyes. And then, through the blinding downpour, Emeka appeared. He had come on foot, the taxi having parked a few blocks away after being told there was no enough guest parking. He carried a bright yellow umbrella and a folded jacket, both soaked through by the time he reached her. "Madam," he said, breathless, "I came as fast as I could." He covered her with the umbrella, without hesitation, shielding her with his own body from the rain. She was already soaked, her blouse clinging to her skin, but she didn't care. The moment felt strangely cinematic. Her anger melted, replaced by something quieter, warmer. "Your jacket is drenched," she said, almost laughing. "So are you," he replied, and then added with a smile, "but you still look like the boss of the world." She let out a laugh, sharp, genuine, the kind that came from her belly, not her boardroom. Together they half ran to the roadside where the taxi was parked and promised the driver double fare for the ride. The small vehicle was cramped, and the seat cushions smelled of wet rubber and engine oil, but Linda couldn't stop laughing. The absurdity of it all. Her, Linda, in the back of a taxi with her company driver, dripping wet, laughing like a teenager skipping school. She looked at him, really looked at him, his white shirt, soaked and clinging to lean muscle, the curve of his jaw, the quiet confidence in his eyes. His hand, steady on the metal frame of the vehicle, keeping her from bumping into the edge. The way he spoke to the taxi driver respectfully, even in the chaos of rain and honking and confusion. The way he glanced at her, not with entitlement, but with calm, grounded presence. And something shifted inside her. He wasn't just kind, he wasn't just loyal. He was strong, smart, beautiful, a man. Not in the flashy, curated way that the men in her social circle presented themselves, designer watches and hollow egos, but in the quiet, deeply rooted way that made a woman feel safe, seen, and maybe even cherished. She didn't say anything then, but something new had opened, a door she didn't even realize had been closed. A current passed between them, silent but undeniable. By the time they reached her apartment, and she was inside, toweling her hair and drinking hot tea, her heart was doing something unfamiliar, something nervous and giddy. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of Amika, soaked in the rain, smiling like the world didn't own him, stayed behind her eyelids. And it occurred to her, this man didn't need to be rich or powerful to matter. He already mattered. It wasn't planned. In fact, Linda spent most of the night arguing with herself about it. She woke early, long before her alarm. The rain had stopped, but the memory of it still lingered, on her damp shoes by the door, in the faint ache in her throat, and most of all, in the quiet flicker behind her ribs every time she thought of Amika's soaked shirt and that umbrella. She made her usual tea, tried to scroll through emails, even opened a half-finished report, but her mind kept circling back to him. The way he had shielded her, the sound of their shared laughter in the rickety taxi, and that fleeting moment in the rearview mirror where their eyes had met, not boss and employee, but man and woman. By the time she heard the familiar soft knock on her apartment door, the one he always gave when arriving early for pickups, her heart had already made a decision her pride was still trying to negotiate. She opened the door without her usual blazer or lipstick, just a simple robe tied loosely at the waist and bare feet on cold tiles. Emeka stepped back slightly, surprised. "Good morning, madam," he said with a respectful nod, eyes quickly darting away. "Good morning, Emeka," she replied, voice softer than usual. "Come in. I made too much breakfast." He hesitated. She could see the calculations in his head. Professional boundaries, protocol, appearances, all of it. But she also saw something else, the curiosity, the quiet flicker of hope. After a long second, he stepped in, removed his shoes by the door. She led him to the small glass dining table in her sunlit kitchen, where the smell of scrambled eggs, toast, and fried plantain hung in the air like a warm invitation. 2 mugs of tea steamed gently beside the plates. "I figured since we both got caught in that rainstorm last night, we deserved something hot today," she said casually, as if this was normal, as if she wasn't breaking 1,000 silent rules by inviting her driver to sit at her table. Emeka sat down slowly. "Thank you, madam," he said. "Linda," she corrected, gently. "Just Linda, at least while we eat." He smiled, small and a little unsure, but there it was. Real, warm, honest. It softened the tension in the room. They ate in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, the clink of cutlery filling the space. Then came light conversation, how the rain had caused flooding downtown, how Lagos traffic might be even worse that morning, how his taxi adventure from the night before had earned him a scraped elbow. And then laughter again, not the kind you share with strangers, but the kind that comes when you both remember something absurd and oddly intimate, the kind that makes time slow down. By the time they were done, the sun had climbed higher, the tea had cooled, and something unspoken had taken root between them. Not love, not yet, but a beginning, a quiet breaking of walls, a small act of courage, and the first meal of many, shared not just as madam and driver, but as 2 people learning to see each other clearly for the first time. Whispers began immediately. At first they were subtle, sideways glances at work, delayed responses in WhatsApp groups, hesitant smiles from colleagues who had once called her boss lady with pride. Then came the rumors. "She's spending a lot of time with her driver, have you noticed? Maybe he's charming her for money. Or maybe she's just lonely." Linda wasn't blind. She saw the raised eyebrows when she arrived at industry events with Emeka as her driver, now occasionally stepping out of the car to open the door for her with an ease that felt more intimate than professional. She noticed how her PA stammered more when asking about her calendar, how the receptionist began calling her Ma again instead of Linda. But the real storm came from home. Her elder sister, Chioma, called her one evening, voice sharp and full of disbelief. "Linda, is it true what I'm hearing? That you're seeing your driver?" Linda, seated calmly at her kitchen counter, replied, "Yes, I am." The silence on the other end was deafening before it exploded into fury. "You a whole Linda? Director of Operations? Is that how low you've sunk? What will people say? What kind of man is that to build a home with?" And it didn't stop with Chioma. Her aunt called from Enugu, quoting proverbs and shaming her for throwing away dignity for pity. Her pastor's wife sent her a voice note suggesting that such relationships open doors to disgrace. Even her best friend from university, Uju, pulled her aside and asked in a half-joking tone, "Are you okay? Or are you under some spiritual influence? To them, it didn't matter that Emeka was kind, or that he was smart, or that he treated her better than any of the polished men in tailored suits who had tried and failed to love her. All they saw was class, status, image. They didn't see the man who had once pulled over to buy her suya when she was craving street food at 10 p.m. They didn't see the way he never tried to control her, only support her. They didn't see how she smiled more often now, how her eyes no longer carried the exhaustion of being the strong one every single day. And though Linda wore her confidence like armor, the words still cut. She would sit in her car sometimes, staring ahead while Emeka quietly navigated traffic, wondering if love was supposed to feel this heavy, if choosing happiness always came with this much resistance. But every time she looked at him, his calm hands on the steering wheel, his eyes soft when they met hers, she remembered something deeper, that love doesn't always come in the package society expects. Sometimes it comes in the form of a man who stands in the rain for you, a man who listens more than he speaks, a man who doesn't make you smaller just to feel bigger. And Linda, for all her success, had never felt more seen than she did in Emeka's presence. So, despite the whispers, the shame, the warnings, and the judgment, she stood by him, and that decision would go on to rewrite both of their lives in ways no one could have imagined. Linda wasn't embarrassed. For the first time in years, she was seen, listened to, cherished, and above all, loved. Emeka never tried to control her or shrink her light. Instead, he encouraged her. On weekends, they would go over his ideas: a small courier business, affordable dispatch services for small e-commerce vendors, and eventually, a cold chain logistics service for transporting fresh food across Nigeria. When she married him 2 years later, the tabloids exploded. Top executive marries her driver. She lost friends. Her aunt stopped talking to her. At work, they whispered, "She'll regret it." But Linda never looked back. With her encouragement, Emeka launched Rapid Link Logistics. She didn't just fund it, she coached him, helped him register it, connected him to mentors, even introduced him to her harshest investor contacts. He failed a few times, lost a major client in year 2. But he learned. He always got back up. By year 3, he opened a small office in Ikeja. By year 5, he had over 100 dispatch bikes, 50 employees, and a growing list of corporate clients. By year 7, Rapid Link Logistics was handling cross-state deliveries. Emeka didn't just rise, he soared. And he never lost himself. He employed other struggling youth, offered part-time scholarships, and treated every staff member like family. He remembered what it meant to be overlooked. Meanwhile, Linda kept rising too, becoming a keynote speaker, taking board seats, mentoring young women in logistics. They grew side by side. He had become everything they said he could never be. And the world? It had no choice but to eat its words. 10 years after their quiet wedding, Emeka surprised Linda with a grand dinner. There were flowers, candles, even a saxophonist. But the real surprise came in the form of a legal document. He gave her 50% equity in his now thriving logistics company. "You invested in me when all I had was an old notebook and hope. You didn't just marry me, you built me. This is yours too," he said, tears in his eyes. Linda, too stunned to speak, simply hugged him. In the end, the victory wasn't just in proving people wrong, it was in proving love right. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more stories.